Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. You're in Season 5 of Wrestling at Random, where the theme is more wrestling than ever. Some 19,000 and counting entries of professional wrestling, whether they be TV shows, pay-per-views, specials, anything else you can think of. Probably 50 to 60,000 hours of pro wrestling available for the randomizer to choose this year. This season, I should say. And we've had some off-the-wall ones, which is expected when you have that many entries in a randomizer. However, I was very happy this week, Jeremy, because the randomizer decided to serve me up a nice heaping dish of comfort food. If you're watching on our YouTube channel right now, you probably have an idea of what show, what wrestling television show we'll be reviewing. This is an episode of WCW Monday Nitro from August 19th, 1996. We're about 6 weeks into the NWO in full force after Hulk Hogan turned and joined with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall at Bash at the Beach. Also, this show takes place 2 weeks after a Nitro that I attended live at Disney MGM Studios on August 5th, 1996. I'll lay out what that card was a little bit later because it was pretty wacky.
August 19th, 1996 edition of Nitro. This is, the randomizer has chosen 5 Nitros over the course of our 5 seasons. You can go back. We did another episode back in season 2, February 26th of 1996. We did an episode of Monday Nitro.
So just prior to the NWO and to WCW really taking over in the ratings war.
That is correct. And now here we are, just a few weeks after. We also did an episode from 97 and 2 from 98. So here we are in 1996. This is pre-Goldberg. This is post-Hogan turning in the NWO just weeks prior, like you mentioned.
Pre-Crow Sting by a couple months, and we'll see what happens here on this show. What is built to for the upcoming pay-per-view Fall Brawl will lead directly to the events that turn Sting dark.
You mentioned our YouTube channel. That's where you can watch the video version of this podcast. You can watch Adam and I do the podcast over at our
Monday
YouTube
Nitro
channel.
Shirt, the most important thing. I'm disappointed we didn't coordinate. You're not wearing your NWO shirt.
That would have been timely, although not for this episode.
Yeah, spoiler that you might actually be on theme here by not wearing your NWO shirt this week.
And so let's talk about it. We're in Huntsville, Alabama, the Von Braun Civic Center.
Huntsville, Alabama. I never went to a wrestling show there, but I am deeply familiar with that town. Not a lot of positive memories from being out there. Didn't live there, but visited. But yeah, when I looked up after this, I'm like, where was this? I didn't catch where they said it was. Von Braun Civic Center, Huntsville, Alabama. This is a classic WCW TV taping building. I feel like the only Civic Center that it is rivaled by in WCW history is the Cobb County Civic Center.
5,850 people in attendance, 3,760 of them paid.
Wow, so only 60% or so paid.
And the gate was $44,344.
The building was packed, though. We'll see. Like the house lights are fully up, and it's a small, not super tiny, but a small building, and it didn't look like it could fit much more than 5,850.
The first hour, this is when Nitro was only 2 hours long, and the first hour, our commentary team is Tony Schiavone and Larry Zbyszko. Now, we go into the history of Monday Nitro, the TV show, and all of that. If you go all the way back to season 2, I mentioned that episode of Monday Nitro. That's where we'll give you the history. Go back in this free feed you're listening to right now and listen to the first 5 minutes of that if you want a good recap on how we got to Monday Nitro, how we got to 1996, and the Monday Night Wars, which we are in at this moment. Hour number 1, Tony Schiavone, Larry Zbyszko on commentary, and we go right to the ring. We have our opening match, VK Wall Street, also known as Mike Rotunda, taking on Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
This is I liked this not because it was good, because it wasn't, but VK Wall Street. It's a callback to Michael Wall Street, which is the charter member of the York Foundation. We are a proud York Foundation podcast. He was no longer one of the computerized men of the 1990s. Instead, he's just wearing singlet with money on it. The VK, obviously Vincent Kennedy McMahon, because he always had to get shots in. I'm wondering if years later, if he could have been a surprise member of the Voodoo Kin Mafia in TNA.
Yes, the Mike Rotunda gimmicks, from Varsity Club Mike Rotunda to Captain Mike Rotunda to IRS.
He went from being the captain of the football team to being a seafaring captain. Still
yes,
the most
wearing a sailor's hat.
in I guess if we want to call it modern wrestling history.
IRS Irwin R. Shyster, and here he is, Michael Wall Street, now VK Wall Street. And yeah, Hacksaw Jim Duggan is Hacksaw Jim Duggan that you remember, and this is apparently a rematch from the Clash of the Champions, which took place the Thursday prior to this Monday night.
Yes, and there's several Clash of the Champions. If you want to go back and hear our history about that semi-regular special that would air on TBS, we get a short video package, if you want to call it that, highlights of their match the previous Thursday at Clash of the Champions, where apparently Hacksaw Jim Duggan, I had completely forgotten about this. His gimmick was that he would just blatantly in front of the referee take a roll of tape out of his trunks and tape his fist up and then hit a tape fist punch to get the win. This is one of the most ridiculous Three Stooges level pratfalls I've seen in pro wrestling, where he takes the tape out of his trunks, starts spinning around to wrap it. Instead, it wraps his arm up with referee Nick Patrick's arm. Everyone falls down, and somehow this leads to Hacksaw Jim Duggan getting pinned by Wall Street. It's the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. Toru Yano would say, "Get more serious." And yeah, that leads us to the rematch here. God knows we needed it.
Yeah, this match, if you close your eyes and you picture, what does a Mike Rotunda Jim Duggan match look like? It's exactly that. It's exactly what you're picturing. That happened move for move, and including a long Wall Street chin lock spot.
Yes, it's exactly as you would imagine, but longer. This felt like it was from prime time wrestling. Jim Powers, Mike Sharp for Madison Square Garden. It just went on and on and on. There's a great line, though, where Tony Schiavone just, for no reason at all, says that he thinks that Hacksaw Jim Duggan is misunderstood. He's a smart strategist. And Larry Zbyszko sounds legit offended. He says, "Are you ribbing me, Tony?" Tony says, "No, I'm not ribbing." And then Larry says, "In the game of human chess, Hacksaw Jim Duggan is not a player." I lost it. That broke me. Larry was hit and miss, to say the least. Yes. But he was tremendous here. Much better than anything else in the match. This is all about what really we'll see and hear throughout the show. It's all about Nick Patrick as the referee and the questions that have emerged in recent weeks over whether Nick Patrick has it out for WCW. Is he on the take? Is he with the NWO? Is he Danny Davis reincarnated? And yeah, I'll have thoughts on that throughout this show, because it could be very bad, but I feel like they actually did this very well.
We'll save my opinions on this as the show goes on. Duggan pulls the athletic tape out of his tights again. He tapes up his hand, hits the big punch, gets the win.
Directly in front of Nick Patrick, who just lets it happen. He lets the babyface use a foreign object here and counts the pin. So that's your first Nick Patrick, what is he doing moment.
Mean Gene interviews Hacksaw Jim Duggan after the match. Gene asks him about Hulk Hogan and the New World Order. And Duggan calls Hogan Terry, so you know it's serious. And then the Macho Man makes his way down to the ring and interrupts. Savage says he's got a problem with Hogan. And then we see last week on Nitro, Savage was taking on the United States champion Ric Flair when Hogan came out and attacked Savage with a chair. And we find out that Savage will be wrestling the Giant in our main event tonight.
Yes, apparently they had some sort of deal, Savage and the Giant, and it didn't work out, so that's why it's a bit of a grudge match. The best part of this, other than Randy Savage just being Randy Savage, is when he says that he had 15,000 stitches in his head last week, but he's ready to go tonight. That was a pretty hard unprotected chair shot, so maybe in the world of pro wrestling that is true.
After commercial, we get a recap of Hogan beating the Giant for the world title, and Hogan spray-painted NWO on the belt for the very first time. We see clips of the Clash of the Champions where the Giant hits a drop kick, chokeslams Chris Benoit, and gets an immediate victory.
Yeah, like a 30-second win. Benoit got caught up in the jacket arguing with the woman. And like you said, Giant big drop kick, the biggest choke slam you've ever seen, and he beats Chris Benoit. I remember.
I love the Giant drop kick.
Oh,
it's always exciting. It's always fun.
Yeah, when he would bust that out, it was crazy. I remember, and again, talk about how life changes 25, 30 years later. I remember being so angry when the Giant beat Chris Benoit, my favorite wrestler at that time, in 30 seconds with the choke slam. It was my Sheamus, Bryan Danielson moment.
Sure.
Clearly now look at everything with Chris Benoit. So we've talked about in previous episodes a little bit differently, quite a bit differently actually. But yeah, so that's you see that footage from Clash of the Champions, and then we go back to the ring, and it is Earl Robert Eaton, the Blue Bloods British presentation of beautiful Bobby Eaton. Apparently he is having problems with his Blue Bloods mates, Lord Steven Regal and Squire Dave Taylor. So he's striking out on his own, and he is taking on Chris Benoit, who has both Woman and Elizabeth with him. I had forgotten that Elizabeth was one of the two valets of the Horsemen during this time period.
It's a weird period in this 96 run here where it's like the old WCW bridging with an NWO WCW. Time. So you get these weird things like the Blue Bloods showing up here and VK Wall Street.
The Dungeon of Doom.
The Dungeon of Doom will be in our main event later. And it's like, so you get these weird classic, you get Sting as classic Sting. You get these weird WCW things along with the NWO stuff sprinkled throughout. It's the through line, even though we haven't seen them. Gene is asking every single person about it. The commentators are doing podcasts about it during each match, and it's all that is important.
Well, if you weren't watching during this time period, like you can't really overstate how good of a job WCW did in the early weeks and months of the NWO in building in that paranoia and that chaos and that fear that everyone in WCW felt that at any time they could be taken out. We're just 3 weeks after the NWO's absolute decimation of WCW at one of the Disney MGM Studios Nitros, the infamous lawn darting of Rey Mysterio into the production truck. And so that is still very fresh. That trauma is still very fresh for everyone in WCW here in kayfabe. And yeah, just the looming specter of the NWO with them not even here essentially is enough to throw everything off the rails for WCW. And like you said, it is a weird time period. It's not even just the old WCW and the new WCW. You've got vestiges of like legacy WCW, like you said, with Sting, Flair, Arn Anderson. And then you've got that weird 94, 95 Hogan's in, but the NWO hasn't started yet era, like you said, with the likes of Jim Duggan and the Blue Bloods gimmick and stuff like that. It's WCW would feel very differently even a year later from this.
You'll be shocked to hear that a match between Chris Benoit and Bobby Eaton was good and very entertaining.
Yes, no, this was solid stuff, as it always is. And also it's a bit of a history note in that these two guys briefly were tag team partners in WCW in 1993 during Benoit's first run. Bobby Eaton didn't have a tag partner. They got a short run, maybe lasted like a month or two. But yeah, it's just even if you take away the Blue Bloods gimmick, just seeing Bobby Eaton on Nitro always throws me off because it's not the era of WCW that you associate him with at all.
Yeah, and it's funny to think this is less than 10 years from the 87 studio shows
Yes.
where, we reviewed those World Championship Wrestling studio shows from 1987. This is less than 10 years from that, and the production looks like it's 30 years later compared to that.
Well, yeah, and we always talk of, once you get into like the HD era of WWE, other than some bad like augmented reality graphics, WWE production really, and maybe just more and more shaky cam, but like the way everything is shot, it's basically identical or in big arenas, the whole deal. Whereas, 10 years from being in a small TV studio, really bare bones to here. Yes, it's the Von Braun Civic Center, but this is a full-on major television production, pyro everywhere you look. It does not feel like the same promotion visually.
Great intensity, ground grappling. Eaton gets rammed head first into the post and then hip tossed out on the floor. They end up going back inside. Benoit continues the beatdown. Eaton hits a swinging neckbreaker, goes to the top rope. He misses the Alabama Jam leg drop.
Awkward Alabama Jam attempt
Terrifying
ever, particularly here in Huntsville of all places. The problem was Benoit was not in the right position. He did not get Benoit position for this, I guess, because he knew he was going to miss it. But he gets up there and he's like, well, all right, I've got to somehow make this look like I could land it. So he kind of twists in midair. Not like Two Cold Scorpios twisting in midair for a splash. Like you said, it looks terrifying. And then that's followed up by something even more terrifying, particularly in hindsight. An absolutely brutal top rope headbutt by Chris Benoit that is legit head-to-head contact. And then you think, wow, he was doing this move basically every night, probably 100, 150 times a year for 15 years.
The huge diving headbutt gets the victory, and then we get a video package where it says, "Blood runs cold. Glacier is coming to WCW."
These video packages ran for months on WCW programming, and this was before they got Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. This was going to be the big story, the big angle that Eric Bischoff, a noted martial arts enthusiast, who apparently had watched Mortal Kombat one too many times, he thought that this was going to be the thing that helped WCW win the war. This was going to be the main story in the company. Glacier and Mortis and Wrath. They waited and waited and waited. They finally debuted it, and it ended up not being much of a thing at all.
Back to Clash of the Champions highlights. The Outsiders were at ringside during a tag team match for the championship, and Nick Patrick sees the Outsiders outside, calls for a DQ in a triple threat tag team match, and
he
ended up he robs the Steiners of the tag team titles here.
Yeah, it was Harlem Heat, the Steiners, Sting and Lex Luger in a triangle match for the tag team titles. Scott Steiner hits the Frankensteiner. He's about to win. The Outsiders are just standing in the aisleway like 60 feet from the ring, and that is enough for Nick Patrick to ring the bell. Again, he has plausible deniability. They're out there. They're trying to get involved in the match. So if you want to go by the letter of the law, using his judgment, he could call that for that disqualification, but it screwed over the baby faces, the Steiner brothers, and they were not able to win the tag titles. Nick Patrick, by the way, they show Nick Patrick interview afterwards with Gene where he says he is a great referee because he can see multiple things happening at the same time.
We get highlights of Flair versus Hogan for the title. Hogan pulls the referee down while he's in the figure four, and the Outsiders hit the ring, and they have a beatdown, and the match gets thrown out.
Yes, a DQ finish in the world title main event of Clash of the Champions. So we had that, and we had that DQ in the tag title. So this was not the Clash of the Champions of 5-10 years prior. Different vibe here for sure. They were, and it's what WCW did on Clashes or Nitros. They gave you the big matches. We'll see this later. They gave you the big matchups, but you did not get anything approaching a satisfying finish. And it's not like 80s All Japan where you at least had badass action for 15 minutes and then a double count out. You didn't even get that.
Sting and Lex Luger are in the back. Gene says there will be a surprise. And Sting says life in WCW has never been a cakewalk, and he can't stand either of the horsemen, but he's got a surprise for them later tonight.
This is a really weird presentation of Sting visually, and I remember at the time it seemed so strange. For like at least 4 or 5 months prior to this, including this, Sting had no longer had the bleach blonde hair. He was letting his hair grow out to where he just had his natural hair, but the rest of it was, it was a dark brown hair, but the rest of it was the Surfer Sting look. It was in preparation so that when he turned or went to the Crow Sting, he didn't have blonde hair at that point. He didn't have to dye it. But it made for a very strange look parachuting in here.
Speaking of strange looks, Disco Inferno versus Scott Flash Norton. I got excited because I want to see Scott Norton kill this guy. I am not a fan of the Disco Inferno. I'm looking forward to seeing him get squashed by Scott Norton. And quick fashion corner on Scott Norton. He's wearing the most early 90s gear you've ever seen.
Well,
and it says Flash on the side of his thigh. It looks like he's a member of the New Rockers, and that's not the presentation I would think of with Scott Flash Norton.
But what he's wearing is he's still wearing his Fire and Ice tag team gear, and I thought, oh, we're in the Fire and Ice era of Scott Norton. We are told on commentary shortly thereafter that recently Scott Norton had turned on Ice Train. He was dissatisfied with their results. They had some awesome matches with the Steiners, just hoss fights, but they would always lose. Scott Norton lost patience and turned on Ice Train.
I have no Ice Train memories or knowledge because it was in my dark period where I did not watch wrestling from 92 to 96. So I missed an entire run of Fire and Ice. So I did not have any context to this whatsoever. And tell me about Ice Train.
Ice Train in the right situation could have been a really good big guy. I mean, build wise, he's, similar build to, I'm not dissimilar from Scott Norton or, Powerhouse Hobbs is another example, just big, thick, meaty guy, as they like to say. Miro, another guy you could throw in there with that sort of build. He was not polished, but in that team with Scott Norton, I remember being disappointed that they didn't keep them together because it was one of those things where it's like neither of them are going to be top guys apart. But if I can see them throwing down with Harlem Heat and the Steiners and the Nasty Boys and everyone else, throwing Public Enemy on, I would have enjoyed more of that. What I did enjoy, though, one of our favorite things here on the podcast is mid-90s internet on wrestling television, and we get a recap of how Scott Norton turned on Ice Train. Ice Train at I think it was either at the Clash of Champions or at Hog Wild, Road Wild, whatever it was, the pay-per-view a few weeks earlier. Ice Train was in the WCW CompuServe chat room chatting with fans when Scott Norton attacked him viciously.
For those listening that says CompuServe, what was that? You would know there was basically 3 ways to get on the internet in 1996. CompuServe, Prodigy, and America Online. Those were the ways you got online, and this was the CompuServe chat room.
And they were both, and they weren't necessarily ISPs. They were I think most people thought of them as the internet. You had AOL and you thought that AOL was the internet.
Because you paid AOL to get access to the internet.
Yes, exactly. They were the middleman. I still miss, separate from this, the best web browser of all time, Netscape Navigator, SkyPoint. If you're watching on YouTube, I still miss that little logo.
So this match starts and Disco's jumped right before the bell. I love this. Disco with some shots, no selling from Norton. Huge clothesline by Norton. Disco rolls outside. And then Norton leaves the ring Rockers style, the way the Rockers used to. And it made me laugh because I was thinking New Rockers in my head. And then back inside, Norton runs him over again. He's standing on the stomach of Disco Inferno. Disco tries to like DDT Norton or do something, but he's immediately picked up and thrown off.
Dropped almost right on his head. What if the ring would have been 6 inches higher up, it could have been disaster for Disco. He was vertical until the very last moment.
Norton hits the shoulder breaker, and he's talking crap to Ice Train, slaps on the armbar for the submission. All Scott Norton domination, just as I hoped it would be.
I love that Scott Norton is like the most jacked Anderson family member ever with his offense here towards the end. The big running shoulder breaker out of the Canadian backbreaker position, which I love. One of the best finishers in the WCW games for N64. And then he hits a single arm DDT and the Fujiwara armbar, or as Tony Schiavone calls it, the single armbar. I'm like, where's the double armbar? But it's the single armbar, and that gets the submission. And yeah, I guess we're getting a singles match between Scott Norton and Ice Train. And that story continues because we go backstage with Gene Okerlund and a very heavy-looking Teddy Long, who is standing next to a nearly mummified, he's taped up so much, Ice Train. My takeaway from this is that Ice Train desperately needed a manager, and he had one here. Ice Train promo, not good. He looked scared, wasn't even looking into the camera. This was a little yikes.
But good news, Teddy Long is awesome.
Yes. And Teddy Long looked older here than he did as a SmackDown GM.
Lord Steven Regal versus Dean Malenko. Hell yes, this is why we love Nitro.
Well, before that, we get a promo for WCW Saturday Night that I'm wishing would have gotten pulled as well by the randomizer. As it is, they tell us we will have Dave Taylor versus Lex Luger and Ric Flair versus Dean Malenko. Wow.
Yeah, we've got Regal versus Dean Malenko here. I'm excited. A lot of grappling, and then we go to commercial. No, I'm missing grappling.
Yes, I'm so upset. We've had
no picture-in-picture here.
No commercial interruptions for matches up until this point. And then we get Dean Malenko and Lord Steven Regal, and they're doing awesome Dean Malenko and Lord Steven Regal things, just really unique, cool grappling, and we go to break. We come back, and you guessed it, they're still doing awesome stuff, an incredible series of counters. Regal with a cartwheel, then hits an unbelievable enziguri, and Regal is fired up like he's a babyface here. He's proud of his athleticism, and he should be.
Malenko does a full flip getting hit by that enziguri.
Yes.
More solid wrestling all around, jumping double knee to the face of Malenko. Regal goes and puts on a full Nelson, and he's got the full Nelson on, and he pushes Malenko down by stepping on the back of the leg and the knee of Malenko. 1,000 times cooler than Billy Jack Haynes or Hercules. If you listen to our review of Wrestling Challenge last week.
Yes, this is. You'll be shocked to know that Lord Steven Regal is a better technician than Billy Jack Haynes or Hercules. Also, this is where, I said, sometimes I like Larry on commentary, sometimes I hate him. Larry Zbyszko criticizing the full Nelson technique of Lord Steven Regal. I'm like, yeah, I don't agree with you here. The other thing that I noticed, Jeremy, it must have been 110 degrees in this building.
Everybody's sweating real fast.
Dudes, and they were going hard. This was some fast-paced grappling, but they were glistening, soaking wet, sweating just a couple minutes into this match.
Malenko with a German suplex hits it again with a bridge for a 2 count. Regal hits an awesome butterfly suplex for 2. And then Regal does this awesome move where he floats over Malenko. Just the smoothest thing you've ever seen, and ends up rolling him up. I can't even describe how crazy this was.
No, this was some Zack Sabre Jr. 2023 stuff here in 1996 from Lord Steven Regal.
And he's 3x the size of Zack Sabre Jr.
Yes.
And he's doing this move with the grace and just literally floating is the only word I can think of.
Yeah, he's absolutely, at worst, keeping up with Dean Malenko, if not quicker than Dean Malenko in all of these exchanges. Beautiful stuff. But out of that, Malenko counters, and he hits a beautiful pinning combination of his own. It's like a step through Oklahoma roll, all in one motion. Gets the 3 count. Big pop from the crowd. What a just great little TV match. You said at the top when we started talking about this match, this is why we love WCW Monday Nitro. Exactly my thought as well. Hook this type of TV match into my veins. Just delightful stuff.
It was tremendous. And, before the Monday Night Wars, you weren't getting this.
No.
This was nowhere on your television set. So to now have something like this is why we loved Monday Nitro, and this is why we loved Dean Malenko and Steven Regal. Regal is significantly bigger than Dean Malenko, and Dean Malenko, who they're talking about going for the Cruiserweight Championship again, this is one of those guys who, like a Rey Mysterio, like an Eddie Guerrero at this time, they're wrestling bigger than their size.
Oh, yeah. The match...
You think that you feel that Regal and Malenko are the same size when Regal is so much bigger. It's incredible.
Well, it's a great point because when the match starts, you have that, oh my God, Regal is so much bigger than Dean Malenko moment, like seeing Billy Gunn in the ring with anyone who isn't 7 feet tall. And then 5 minutes into the match, like your mind, you don't notice it anymore, and you're seeing them as the same size, which is such a credit to both of them, really, the way each of them were wrestling.
The match story wasn't about a size difference.
Yes.
And so it didn't play in, and you didn't see it. And you literally saw them as the same size in a competitive match.
Which is
incredible art.
On top of the actual in-ring action, what you just described, I think, is the strongest delineation between how this match would be done in the WWF during this time period versus WCW. The entire story in the way the match would be worked, and the entire story on commentary would have been, oh, look at that little pit bull, Dean Malenko, against the much bigger Steven Regal. But here it's just these two guys are freaking great wrestlers, and we're going to call the match and somebody's going to win. It was the best part of Nitro that you had. Yes, you had, if you're an old fan that liked, old WWF guys, you had Jim Duggan, you had, you'd have big bruising stuff, you'd have other big stars, but then you also had this melting pot of like guys from all around the world, the sort of cruiserweight /TV /US title mix, all kind of cross-pollinated in 95, 96, 97. It was awesome.
Ric Flair and Arn Anderson join Mean Gene. They cut a quick promo because it's hour number 2 and we need some indoor pyro.
Yes, it's not like that one Nitro where, who was it, Bam Bam Bigelow and somebody were wrestling, and during the match, they're doing like moves and just the most pyro you've ever seen indoors goes off, and Bigelow's like, I'm just grabbing a reverse chinlock till this is over, till we survive this. Here, it's great because Gene is trying to wrap Ric Flair up for the pyro, and Rick is not having any of it. Rick is going to do his promo come hell or high water or pyrotechnics.
Hour 2, we replaced Tony Schiavone and Larry Zbyszko with Eric Bischoff and Bobby the Brain Heenan on commentary.
Yes, I had a few thoughts right away, and it's throughout this hour, but just get it out now. It's interesting that Schiavone and Bischoff are such different announcers. Schiavone is much better at actually calling the action. Eric Bischoff, like him calling the moves, is really annoying. He's got this weird cadence. It's like fast, slow. It's really strange, but he is tremendous, particularly when he's on camera, at getting over the seriousness and the danger of what's going on with the NWO, and also this righteous indignation. This is pre the big shocking turn of Eric Bischoff joining the NWO, basically doing Mr. McMahon a year before Vince McMahon did that character. But the other thing that Bischoff is great at, as compared to the way Tony Schiavone would be with Bobby Heenan on other shows, is that Bischoff, like Vince McMahon or Gorilla Monsoon, will actually bite on all of Bobby Heenan's ridiculousness and then play off of it and get mad and get offended, whereas Tony Schiavone would just blow it off and act like Heenan was an idiot. It's a really different way of hearing Bobby in WCW.
We go to the ring for the Nasty Boys versus the Public Enemy. And I've said this every time they come on my television, and I will continue to say it. I never got it. Don't get it. I don't understand Public Enemy. I didn't understand him in ECW, and I for sure never understood this team in WCW.
I loved Public Enemy and ECW, and it's a funny statement to make because I never actually saw a Public Enemy ECW match until after they left ECW because we didn't get ECW TV here. They went to WCW, but you'd always see them in the magazines, and it just looked like the most chaos possible when they were out there. But yeah, they were, I think maybe even more than when Sandman came in and he was hardcore hack. I don't think there was ever an ECW act that lost more by being out of the ECW environment than Public Enemy. They were, particularly Johnny Grunge, but even as an act, they were the personification of, the classic Paul Heyman. He hides the guy's weaknesses and accentuates their strengths. Here in WCW, literally the bright lights of WCW, they were just kind of a poor man's Nasty Boys, really.
They were, and we're watching them take on the OG Nasty Boys here. And
with that Nasty Boys entrance music, hearing the Nasty Boys sing, I had forgotten about that. Between that and Disco Inferno's music, I feel like there's a lost edition of Slam Jam waiting to be released.
So we have guys fighting inside and outside the ring. So they go split screen, and we're watching on two separate feeds, brawling outside and inside the ring. Johnny Grunge misses an elbow drop off the apron onto the floor. That looked awful. And then Sags, he's on the other side. He's on a table at one point, and he rolls off the table. And somehow, WCW production, I didn't see it, but somehow both members of Public Enemy end up going through this table. They put themselves through the table.
Well, the big move, it was the drive-by. Their big move in WCW, and they did in ECW, so their big move in WCW is they'd set up a table on the floor, they'd put their opponent on it, Johnny Grunge would stand on the apron, and then Rocco Rock would bound off the ropes and cannonball himself into his partner and drive both of them through their opponent on the table. Here, Jerry Sags moved. Basically, the entire purpose of Public Enemy and WCW was for the Nasty Boys to not have to take the bumps anymore and for Public Enemy to take those bumps for them. That's precisely what this match was.
Nasty Boys got the win. Gene interviews the Nasty Boys. They want a shot at the tag team titles.
The main theme of this, which it's kind of a running theme throughout, again, is that, and I like it, the seriousness of the NWO and Hulk Hogan turning, that everyone is so disgusted, and Gene's trying to get the bottom of it, whether it be with Hacksaw calling Hogan Terry earlier or here. Gene is basically interrogating Brian Knobbs about his longtime real-life friendship with Hulk Hogan and basically wondering out loud if the Nasty Boys are secret agents for the NWO. And Brian Knobbs basically says, I've been hanging and begging with Hogan before either of us were in WCW. I got no problem with him.
Bischoff and Heenan then discuss the NWO, and they recap everything, and they again hit on that paranoia is the theme.
They hit on the paranoia, but they also have metaphorically their chest puffed out because they say all of WCW's here. We got Sting, we got Luger, we got the Horsemen, Harlem Heat. Everybody's here. We've never seen the NWO show up when WCW is at full strength, and we don't think they're going to show up tonight.
More Clash of the Champion highlights. We see Eddie Guerrero winning a Battle Bowl ring.
Yes, what they used to do, the on and off, they had the Lethal Lottery and the Battle Bowl. I think this was the last time they did it. And DDP won the Battle Bowl ring. He won the lottery. He lost his $13 million and was destitute. And then here we're early in the Diamond Cutter era of DDP. He goes to shake Eddie's hand after Eddie beats him. But instead, you guessed it, DDP pulls Eddie Guerrero in and hits a Diamond Cutter.
We go to the ring. DDP in action, taking on the nephew of Eddie Guerrero, Chavo Guerrero Jr. DDP's stolen the Battle Bowl ring, and Chavo comes down. He's on fire, hits a couple quick drop kicks, sends Page to the floor. Chavo slingshots himself over the top to the floor, and he almost kills himself while wiping out DDP. This dive was terrifying.
So imagine the WrestleMania Undertaker dive, but the guardrails are 10 feet closer, but he takes the same bump that Undertaker did, knocking himself out in the process. That's what happens here with a very young rookie Chavo Guerrero. This was Terrifying.
In the ring, Chavo charges in, DDP moves. Chavo goes shoulder first in the ring post, and DDP starts working over the arm. He hits a sit-out powerbomb, but he doesn't want to pin Chavo. A huge belly-to-belly suplex when he's got the arms hammerlocked behind him.
Yeah, this was awesome. I don't remember DDP doing that before. That was very cool.
It was super cool, but again, pulls him up at 2. He could beat him, but doesn't want to. He wants to continue the punishment. He goes for a diamond cutter. Chavo reverses it into a backslide and gets the pin. I love when the backslide is a finish. This was great. DDP then immediately hits a diamond cutter after the match. He takes the belt off of referee Nick Patrick and starts whipping Chavo with Nick Patrick's belt. Referee Randy Pee Wee Anderson hits the ring to take the belt away from DDP.
Are you sure that wasn't Randy Peterson?
Yes.
Michael Buffer is not here to tell us.
And then Randy Anderson's questioning why Nick Patrick didn't take the belt away from Diamond Dallas Page.
Nick Patrick is incredible here. He gets his belt taken off, and then he just starts running around the ring. Arms are flying. He's flailing around like he cannot get this belt back from DDP. He's the same size as DDP. Little Randy Anderson runs out and immediately jumps in and pulls the belt away from DDP. And then we get ringside. Gene again interrogating Nick Patrick, saying he could have stopped it. Nick Patrick, again, he's got it. He says it's just like a police stop in a particularly potentially dangerous situation. You got to call for backup. He said, that's what makes me and Randy Anderson great. We are a great refereeing team. And then Nick Patrick blames the media and the newspapers for creating this paranoia. Nick Patrick is awesome on this show.
He's executing the role well.
Very well.
The role has no business in wrestling. We talked about Danny Davis on that episode of Wrestling Challenge last week. It's something that you can have you have a heel referee. So now, but he's never like, if he's ever refereeing a match, he's never like he's never just immediately fast counting and the match is over.
Unless it's Torontes in AAA.
Yes. And he's not, and then if he ever turns back again, he's the story has to end at some point.
Yeah. How do you trust him at that point?
What do you do with him? Right. Like you can't have a crooked referee, whoever that referee was in the NBA that was betting on games and everything. Tim Donaghy didn't come back and like with a babyface turn and say he's all cleaned up his act and he's
noted
okay.
NBA expert Adam Summers, by the way.
So it's a tough thing, and Nick Patrick will go on to referee for another couple decades after this eventual heel turn.
He'll go on to be, other than Charles Robinson, the last man standing from WCW in the WWF/WWE for so many years. I agree with everything that you're saying, but in the moment of what they were doing with the NWO, it fit in so well, and to me, it heightened again the paranoia and the fear and the what's going to happen next with what the NWO was going to do, because it wasn't just, well, you've got Hall and Nash. They came in from the WWF. You've got Hulk Hogan turned. If Hulk Hogan can turn, any other wrestler can turn. It's also, is the NWO able to get referees? Are they able to pay off, the executive committee? Like, is WCW going to cease to exist? Like that is what was played here throughout. This wasn't a, WWF style invasion angle where it's sort of like a half step and it's, oh, these guys are here, but then everything else is normal. This was played from the very beginning as an existential struggle for the very survival of WCW. So in that context, and given the performance of Nick Patrick in what you said is a flawed concept of a role, I enjoyed it on this show. We can't let it go. I also enjoyed Gene Okerlund at his best.
Gene was tremendous throughout this in trying to get to the bottom of the NWO, trying to get any information about what's going on with the NWO. Gene was on it. He asked every single person about it. It was the only thing to be talked about. Like, he didn't care about your desire for the tag title.
No.
He wants to know about the NWO and Hulk Hogan's turn.
Including at the very end of this promo, just an offhanded remark by Gene as they were going to break, but it was perfect, and it laid the groundwork for so much that was going to happen with Nick Patrick and the NWO. Gene just says, "Oh, by the way, Nick, that was a beautiful 550,000 home you just purchased. I just saw that in the paper. Couldn't help but notice that."
We go back to footage from 1995, September of 95, when the American Males defeated Harlem Heat to win the tag team championship.
I believe they said the third episode of Monday Nitro. I'm not sure if they misspoke, but the way they said it, it made it sound as though it was in this very building, the Von Braun Civic Center in Huntsville, Alabama, that the American Males, Scotty Riggs and Marcus Alexander Bagwell, had won the titles. Eric Bischoff says they're 1 year more experience, so they may have Harlem Heat's number again. And what happens after that? The American Males theme song plays. The greatest bad theme song in professional wrestling history.
Let's hear a minute of it.
American males, American males, American males, American males, American males. When you say them coming, better run for cover. Girls, you don't need a weekend lover. American males. If they want to talk to you, you better not listen. You might wind up in critical condition. American males.
Could we bookend this any more with the worst song followed by the best song? Because the Harlem Heat music then came on right after that, cleansing the palate after the horrible American Males theme song.
Actually, I should amend my statement about Nick Patrick and Charles Robinson being the longest running WCW thing in the WWF/WWE. The thing that survived everything was Harlem Heat's music. Booker T had that through his entire WWF run. It was that good that Vince McMahon had to keep WCW music. It was good stuff. Definitely better than watching Marcus Bagwell and Scotty Riggs do the clap as they came out. It felt like it was an episode of ECW here with Scotty Anton. They also, for guys that were supposed to be like a modern style Fantastics, they had the most heelish vibe to them as they slowly walked out to the ring with this horrible music doing the big overhand clap. I was not feeling it.
WCW World Tag Team titles are on the line here. The champions are Harlem Heat, the challengers, the American Males. And Harlem Heat is managed by both Sensational Sherry and Colonel Parker.
Yes, this is part of the long-running Colonel Parker, Sensational Sherry storyline, where Colonel Parker was trying to win her love. That went back and forth. They each managed Harlem Heat for a while, then they both managed them. It's also very weird to see Robert Fuller, Colonel Rob Parker on Nitro in the summer of 1996 during the NWO era. It's another one of those things that feels very out of place.
I don't remember any Fullers near the NWO at any point. Like, it just doesn't. He was relegated to Saturday night at most of this. But yeah, it's weird to see him here with Harlem Heat as they begin the beatdown on Riggs, double teaming in the corner. All Harlem Heat to start the match. Booker T goes to the top, but Riggs drop kicks Booker out of the air and tags his partner, Marcus Alexander Bagwell, the future Buff Bagwell. And Buff runs wild, and Booker cuts him off, goes for the pump handle slam. And Bagwell lands on top of Booker, recreating the finish from 1995 that we just saw, but Stevie Ray is there to break it up. Bagwell rolls Stevie Ray into Booker T. Booker goes flying to the outside. Bagwell with the roll-up, but Stevie Ray kicks out. And Riggs goes to the top, hits a missile dropkick. Bagwell goes to the top, but Booker T pushes him off the top. Stevie Ray catches him in midair, hits a power slam, and gets the pin. Still your tag team champions, Harlem Heat.
Fun match. It was definitely a rush. You could tell things had maybe gone long a little earlier. The finish, it was another deal where they did a great job of giving Nick Patrick just enough credibility that you could wonder whether he was a heel or not, whether he was crooked or not. He just happens to turn and miss the shove off the top leading to the power slam finish. The highlight for me in this match, though, was Eric Bischoff on commentary. Again, he sort of is puffing his chest out saying, I don't think there's a fourth or fifth guy in the NWO. I think it's all just smoke or mirrors, which is smoke and mirrors in and of itself, in that in the coming weeks, we will see the Giant join the NWO, and then Eric Bischoff himself will join the NWO as time goes on here. Also, Eric Bischoff, talk about shade in 1996. He buries the martial arts acumen of Stevie Ray multiple times on these sidekicks and basically says what we're all thinking, that Booker T is awesome and Stevie Ray merely exists.
Coming back, we get Ric Flair and Arn Anderson with Woman and Miss Elizabeth. They are the Four Horsemen, two of the Four Horsemen, and they're taking on Sting and Lex Luger.
I was so hyped when they told us at the start of the show we're going to get Flair and Arn against Sting and Luger. That's maybe legitimately the most WCW match you could ever have.
Sting instead says he wants the other two horsemen to come down, so Benoit and Mongo McMichael make their way down. Sting's surprise. He says, instead of beating each other up, we can recognize the major problem in WCW. We can't trust you, but we know you are WCW. They're WCW. And next month at War Games, Sting demands that it be Flair, Anderson, Sting, and Luger as the WCW team in the War Games match. Arn Anderson says, Lex, you can't bring the show muscles. You need to bring the power and the dedication it took to mold the body. I thought that was an awesome line from Arn Anderson.
Same thing in my notes. I thought there was a great promo by Sting, and then Arn, just another classic Arn promo. Everybody was great in this segment. But yeah, that line from Arn was perfect.
So we know the WCW team, the NWO has 3 members. They got to find a 4th going into the War Games.
Well, the idea, too, going into this, just if you were a WCW fan and you had seen how much for the past couple of years, at least the last year, I guess, since Luger was back in WCW, it was, is Luger really Sting's friend? That was the story. I certainly expected, and everyone expected, that it was going to be Luger that would turn on Sting and join the NWO to be the 4th guy. So that's the expectation you have going into Fall Brawl, into that War Games double steel cage match.
Coming back from commercial, we get our first NWO appearance. It's a black and white video.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
With the tagline, the following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Yeah, this is not much. I guess they were supposedly in Italy, but then the camera zooms in and shows the Denver Post corporate offices, so they clearly are not in Italy. I did like the line from Hall where he says that he is the guy who likes to say I told you so, and then he goes on to tell us so. They keep saying they're in Rome, but it's obvious they aren't. And
he told us so that they were going to leave with the WCW title and make it the NWO belt, and they did just that. Then they start making Booty Man jokes about how they don't want him in the NWO at all, and then they make fun of Sting as the segment ends. This is the first and only appearance of the NWO.
Yeah, I was fully convinced that we would see them at the end of the show, but they never came out. By the way, you mentioned the Booty Man, one of the many aliases for Brutus Beefcake. One of the matches that I saw live at Disney MGM Studios exactly 2 weeks before this episode of Monday Nitro was Ric Flair versus the Booty Man for the U.S. title. Also, Giant versus Sergeant Craig Pittman. Main event of Luger and Sting versus the Nasty Boys. Lord Steven Regal against Randy Savage. Chris Benoit against Alex Wright. Medusa against Malaya Hosaka. And the opening match, again, talk about weird to see these guys on WCW Monday Nitro. It was a tag team title match with Harlem Heat defending against the Rock and Roll Express.
We go to our main event. It's the Giant with his manager, Jimmy Hart. The Giant, of course, the future Big Show, tall Paul White. Here he's the Giant, and at his youngest and most athletic, and he's taking on the Macho Man, Randy Savage. Savage immediately jumps the Giant with a chair shot in the entranceway.
He's killing him with these chair shots to the back, to the legs, to the head.
Giant fights back. He presses Macho Man over his head, throws him in the ring. Inside the ring, big shots from the Giant. Goes for the choke slam, but Savage kicks free.
The match has already been thrown out by this point, we should mention. Randy Anderson, after Giant throws Savage back into the ring, he's seen enough. He throws the match out. We're at a no contest.
Jimmy Hart gets attacked, and Savage has a chair again. The Dungeon of Doom hits the ring, and Savage hits Hugh Morris. Then he hits Big Bubba. Then he hits the Giant with the chair as well. The Faces of Fear come down. They get a chair shot, and then Savage is outnumbered, and he runs away. The Giant, in pursuit of Randy Savage, leaps over the top rope to the floor and runs to the back. What an incredible athlete to see him do this.
Yeah, it's ostensibly, even though there's no one that he's leaping on, he basically executes a no-hands tope over the top rope, or a plancha over the top rope to the floor, lands on his feet, and sprints to the back. My God, like you said, what an athlete at this point, pre all the injuries.
Does the NWO have a fourth guy is all we can talk about as the show goes off the air. And that's the end of your episode of Nitro. Nitro and Raw, we mentioned, this is deep in the Monday Night Wars. That night's show, they had a combined audience that was one of the highest combined audiences ever for professional wrestling on television. Nitro did a 3.5 and a 5.8 share, while Raw did a 2.9 and a 4.4 share. So Nitro winning the war at this point. And then Nitro piles on some more. They do a replay right after. The Nitro replay for the West Coast feed did a 1.3 rating with a 3.2 share.
So the way shares worked, you don't really ever hear about that now, but that basically meant that the numbers you laid out for the two live shows, approximately between Nitro and Raw, 11% of all televisions in the United States,
yes,
were watching wrestling, which is
correct.
Crazy statistic.
The Horseman, Sting, and Luger interview that was the peak of the Nitro show. It did a 4.1 rating, while on Raw, its head-to-head counterpart, they put out Shawn Michaels taking on Yokozuna. That only did a 2.9 rating. So WCW was in full control of the Monday Night War at this point.
Well, and it was very compelling television and storytelling. It's so different when you think of even a year later when WCW with the NWO started to meander. But it was very clear that Eric Bischoff had a very clear idea and week by week laid out how they were going to get there. I mean, in the weeks after this, you have Ted DiBiase joining the NWO. You have that classic scene, which just was made even more classic by the driving rainstorm outside the building at Nitro, where there's someone in the limo with DiBiase, and they emerge from the rain, and it's Sting, and Sting attacks and lays out Lex Luger and leaves him in the rain, laying beaten, as Eric Bischoff just sounds completely heartbroken, and we all think that Sting joined the NWO, but it turns out to be a fake Sting, we learn at War Games. All that is what leads to the distrust of Sting, is what leads to the entire Crow Sting gimmick. So, like, they really, like, you think of WWF as the storytelling company, but WCW was so far ahead of them in these early days of the NWO and that part of the game.
Favorite thing on this show for you?
Wrestling wise, it's without a doubt, it's Dean Malenko.
That is correct.
And Lord Saban Regal, just tremendous television wrestling. For me, though, beyond that, it's just, even with the NWO not being there, it's the feel of the looming specter of the NWO and the fact that you have this thing that feels deadly serious, and it is weaving its way in and out of every element of this show. This isn't a wrestling show where each segment is fully disconnected and doesn't have anything to do with the other. It feels like there's something important happening, and if you miss any part of the show, you're going to miss something wild.
Honorable mention to Mean Gene's performance throughout the show, helping to drive that home as well.
Yeah.
Worst thing on this show.
Oh, God, how long VK Wall Street and Hacksaw Jim Duggan went?
Whew, man, that was long. That was a long chin lock.
Especially to start the show. It's crazy when you think about the Monday Night Wars and how much they counter-programmed each other. The idea, and maybe this was Raw 2 hours yet at this point? I guess it probably was.
I believe so.
The idea that on a Monday Night War head-to-head, you would lead off with 10 minutes of Jim Duggan and VK Wall Street, I guess it shows how confident they were in the overall package they had at this point.
I'd say worst thing, honorable mention, the lack of finishes towards the end of the show here. But
well, that's the other hallmark of Nitro, is that you would get the big matches as far as guy X versus guy Y, and you'd be super excited. It sounds like a pay-per-view, but they would never really deliver. And here, the main event, it wasn't even a match. It wasn't 30 seconds in before Randy Anderson threw it out.
And we will fire up the randomizer again next week. It will pick something completely at random. And to find out, we're going to tell you what it is a few days ahead of time. All you got to do is follow us on all of the social media platforms at WrestleAtRandom. There you can find out. We'll put a GIF up and you'll see what is coming up on the next episode of this podcast. What did the randomizer draw? And in addition, if you want more content, all of the episodes in the back catalog are free. And they are evergreen content. So if you want to go back and listen to our first review of Monday Nitro from season 2, go for it. Listen to that history. It's you want to hear more from pre-NWO 1996 Nitro, go listen to that episode. If you want to hear what was going on 96 Raw, we've got some of those in the back catalog as well. Take a look, see what we got here, and go back and listen to all of them. And you've got the option for more content besides all of the free content we have for over 5 seasons. We have a bonus feed where we do an additional podcast every single week, if you can believe it, over 140 plus at the point of this recording, and growing every week over on the bonus feed. That's at patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, or if you are an Apple Podcast subscriber, you can just hit the subscribe button right there in your current podcatcher in your podcast feed if you're an Apple Podcast listener, and it will unlock all of the episodes that are labeled as bonus right there in the same podcast player. Or go to patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, and there you can get all of the bonus content.
Let's be clear. Let's make sure people understand this. If you like this podcast, and I would imagine if you are listening to this, you do, that would stand to reason. There are 145 episodes in the bonus feed right now waiting for you. Every bit as good as the episodes you hear on the free feed, maybe even better, because they're more off the wall. There is some crazy stuff there. There's listener requested shows. There's one-off random wacky stuff. You have 145 episodes of this show that you've never heard. Maybe you go on long work trips. Maybe you have a long work commute. Maybe you work from home and you want to listen to podcasts while you're working on a spreadsheet. There are 145 episodes of this show you've never heard. They're evergreen content. They are waiting for you. And I would say they're tremendous.
And don't forget, we mentioned the YouTube channel also at the top of the show. We also have video versions of the podcast, both for the free feed over at our YouTube channel, Wrestling at Random Podcast, or if you're a Patreon subscriber, you have a YouTube version of the bonus content there as well. So thanks for all the support. And if you want to help support the show, interact with the show, send us all of your Nitro memories or anything else you want to talk about via our social medias or comments on our YouTube videos, and definitely continue to tell your wrestling fan friends about the show. That's the way we spread the word, and continue to do this every single week. And with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Randomizer. Like I said, sometimes I enjoy a nice, familiar meal that reminds me of home. It reminds me of my childhood. That's what Monday Nitro is. We got good Nitro. We didn't get a dying days of a promotion or territory. So this is fun stuff.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.